Hi everyone, this is Anissa Ginter Art Channel, and today I'm starting a new topic in my videos where I will speak about the story which stands behind the characters which I created. Today's episode is dedicated to Chromie, and I want to share with you why and how I created this character twice in my life. But before we start, I want to encourage you to check the description where you will find the links to my ArtStation and to my Instagram. I'm pretty active in Instagram, so if you want to know more about my life and about my art, you're welcome to subscribe to my Instagram. And I would be super excited to see you there. And now it's time to start. So first of all, Chromie you can find in 3 games created by Blizzard, which are World of Warcraft, Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm. First time I came across Chromie was 7 years ago while I was playing Heroes of the Storm. I played a lot on Chromie and I immediately decided that I need to make a fan art of her. First of all, she's very cute and I like sculpting cute characters. Second, she has a lot of amazing outfits, and third, she's my main in game, but it still doesn't mean that I play well on her when I choose her for a match. In 2016 my sculpting skills were very poor, but thankfully I had a friend who is Max Voloshin. He is a 3D character artist and he offered his help improving her sculpt. Technically he resculpted the face and I used that resculpted face and continued working on her. So what I want to say that the face on the first version of Chromie was sculpted not by me, because my version was so awful that hopefully no one has ever seen it. I made the high poly in that brush, retopology in Maya, textures in Substance Painter, render in Marmoset, and I posed her in that brush. I have never been good at rigging, and even now I always pose my characters in that brush. Another interesting fact about Chromie is that later that year I noticed that on the rendered image there were inverted normals. I rendered Chromie, the final version, with inverted normals, and that disgraceful render is still in my portfolio on ArtStation. I have no idea why I keep it there even now, because right now it is like shame. But maybe she's still there because she reminds me of those days when I was trying to become a decent 3D character artist. Who knows, maybe yes. If you look closer to the final render, you will notice that the fireball was literally added in Photoshop. I just found a PNG image with transparency and I stuck it to the final image in Photoshop. At that time, it seemed to me the best idea. The sand clock on which she is standing was planned to be a real sand clock, but I didn't manage to sculpt properly sand inside the clock, and at that time I also didn't know how to set up properly in Marmoset the transparent material. That's why I applied marble material in Substance Painter. Don't ask me why it was marble, I have no idea. I just applied marble material and got away with it. At least it is marble and not jeans material, let's say. Another interesting fact about that sand clock is that on the top and on the bottom of this sand clock there should have been sculpted dragon. I didn't manage to sculpt a dragon, and that's why I found a dragon alpha on the internet, which is actually a thing taken or from Mortal Kombat or from the Overwatch, and I just applied this alpha to the top and to the bottom of that sand clock. You know, I'm telling you all this story and I feel so much ashamed about the decisions which I made in 2016, but this is really how it was then. A lot of years ago, when I was struggling and trying to find my way in this 3D and trying to be creative in solving the problems which I was coming across. However, weird stories are not over yet, because later I was hired to my first serious job because of the sculpt which was done for this character, for this Chromie. During the interview, the art director mentioned that he really likes the way the face of this Chromie was sculpted. And he said also that he saw potential in me, and that means that if I don't know something, they just can teach me. Later that day, I received an offer from that company, and I need to admit that I did not find enough courage to confess that the face of this Chromie was not sculpted by me. However, I had worked in that company for 2 years, and eventually I learned how to sculpt proper stylized faces. At this point, the story of creation of the first version of Chromie is over, and now I can proceed to the story of my second try of making her. And I really hope that it is really the last version, that in future I will not have this desire again to resculpt her, because actually I am done with this character. I'm not a huge fan of resculpting the projects which I have already finished, but that Chromie, she was an exception. Last year I was looking for the concept for my next character, and I didn't manage to find any concept which could capture my heart. And at that time a random thought came to my mind that maybe I should have taken one of my old projects to resculpt it and to see how my skills improved. And of course, immediately I thought about Chromie. I opened the project files and I was shocked to death how bad everything was sculpted there. However, I got around to resculpting her. Literally, I resculpted everything. I used the primary mesh as the base, but in the end, nothing was left from it. I literally resculpted everything. While resculpting Chromie, I was thinking about the pose, and obviously I didn't want to repeat the primary pose which was on my first version, and I found on the internet the illustration of Chromie, which I think is used for Hearthstone game, and I used that illustration as a reference for the final pose which you can see on my second render of this character. When I'm making characters for portfolio, I very often pretty lazy and I pose them at the high poly stage. Initially, I planned to make the full pipeline of Chromie, which is from high poly to low poly to UVs to texturing and to final render, but I ended up with rendering the high poly only. I took a decision not to proceed to the low poly because I faced a problem. I faced burnout. The thing is, surprisingly, I discovered that when you go back to your old projects and you start working on them, improving them, it does not feel like a new project. It feels like you are just continuing making the previous one. The tricky thing is that when you start a new project, you have a limited amount of energy, motivation, whatever for it. And when you go back to your old projects, your storage of energy is not refilled. You work on those drops of energy and motivation which were left after you finished that project for the first time. Hope you understand what I'm getting at. So what I want to say is that by the time I finished high poly, I was emotionally empty for this project and I didn't want to continue. That's why I proceeded straight to rendering, and this is it. I rendered her first in that brush and then composed the render passes in Photoshop, but I wasn't happy with the result. That's why I made a second try and I rendered her in Marmoset 4, and this time I was satisfied with the result. And here is the final render. And during rendering in Marmoset, I tested different angles of view, and I was astonished how much the angle of view influences the perception of the character. Later, I used that model for my course on rendering in Marmoset 4. Another interesting fact about Chromie, and actually, by the way, this is the question which I very often receive on my Instagram, and the thing is that I sculpted the folds on her dress when she was already posed. I never use for sculpting any tricky or custom or pre-made brushes. All the stylized folds which I sculpt in that brush are done with standard brushes which are clay build-up, done standard, pinch, smooth, and edge polish, and that's it. By the way, pretty often I show how to sculpt folds in ZBrush during my streams for Max on ZBrush Live YouTube channel. So if you want to see me at work in process, you can check my streaming calendar here. During the streams, I not only sculpt, I also answer all your questions about the industry, about ZBrush, about sculpting. So if you have any questions, or you want to see me working, or you want just to talk to me, you're welcome to join me at my streams. I would be very glad to see you all at my streams. So this is the end of my story of making 2 versions of Chromie, and next time I will take you behind the scenes of my other characters. So if you like this topic on my video, subscribe to my channel, and I will meet you in my next video. Bye!